The rain had stopped, but the silence on the empty highway felt louder than any storm. Ethan Cole never imagined that a simple drive home would end with a stranger's blood on his hands and his heart breaking for someone he had just met. On that gray afternoon, as the clouds thinned and weak sunlight spilled across the wet asphalt, he saw the flashing blue lights in the distance and a figure lying motionless near the roadside ditch. That was the moment his ordinary life split into before and after. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one brave act to change everything, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Grandma Dearie. Your support keeps these stories alive and spreading hope. Ethan was 36, a warehouse supervisor, and a single father to 8-year-old Noah. Since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, Ethan's world had shrunk to work, school lunches, bedtime homework, and quiet evenings filled with memories he never spoke about. He carried grief like a second shadow, always present, always heavy. Every morning he forced a smile for his son, promising himself that he would stay strong no matter how lonely the nights became. That afternoon, he had just picked up Noah from school and dropped him at his neighbor Mrs. Dalloway's house because he had to return to the warehouse for an urgent delivery. The sky was pale and washed out, the air cool but calm, and traffic almost non-existent. That was when he noticed the police cruiser angled awkwardly on the shoulder, one door open, lights flashing weakly in the daylight. His first thought was to keep driving. Trouble had a way of multiplying, and he had a child waiting at home. But then he saw her. Officer Mara Vasquez lay on the damp grass just off the road, her navy uniform stained darker near her side. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, now partially undone, strands clinging to her pale face. She couldn't have been more than 30. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow and uneven. The sight jolted Ethan's heart into panic. There was no one else around. He pulled over without thinking, his boots splashing through puddles as he ran toward her. The world seemed unnaturally quiet except for the distant hum of wind in bare trees. He knelt beside her and saw the source of the blood, a gunshot wound just below her ribs. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay steady. He had no medical training beyond basic first aid, but instinct took over. He removed his jacket, pressed it firmly against the wound, and shouted her name after reading it off her badge. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, as if she were fighting to stay anchored to the world. Ethan grabbed his phone and called for emergency services, his voice breaking as he tried to explain their location. He kept pressure on the wound, whispering encouragements he wasn't sure she could hear. Time stretched painfully. The sunlight reflected off the wet road, making everything look surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. Mara's hand weakly clutched his sleeve, and for a brief second her eyes met his. There was fear there, but also determination. Ethan thought of Noah. He thought of how fragile life was. He pressed harder, ignoring the blood seeping through his fingers. He wasn't going to let another family lose someone they loved. Not today. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics rushed in with swift precision. They took over, lifting her onto a stretcher while asking Ethan rapid questions. Police units followed, and the quiet highway transformed into controlled chaos. Ethan stood back, his clothes stained, his heart pounding. As they loaded her into the ambulance, one paramedic shouted that she still had a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. After picking up Noah and assuring him everything was fine, he sat alone at the kitchen table, replaying the scene again and again. He didn't know why it affected him so deeply. Maybe it was the helplessness in her eyes. Maybe it was the reminder of how quickly everything could be taken away. 2 days later, he learned through the local news that Officer Mara Vasquez had survived emergency surgery. She had been shot during a traffic stop by a suspect who fled the scene. The report mentioned an unnamed civilian who had applied pressure to the wound and likely saved her life. Ethan turned off the television quickly, not wanting attention. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it because someone needed help. A week passed before there was a knock at his door on a bright, clear morning. Sunlight filled the small living room as Ethan opened the door to find a woman standing there in plain clothes, her arm in a sling, her posture slightly fragile but upright. It took him a moment to recognize her without the uniform and the blood. Mara looked different in daylight, healthier but still pale, her dark eyes steady and filled with emotion. She thanked him softly, her voice slightly strained but determined. She told him that the doctors had said if he hadn't stopped when he did, if he hadn't acted quickly, she would not have made it to surgery in time. Her family had been told to prepare for the worst. Ethan felt uncomfortable with the praise. He shrugged it off, saying anyone would have done the same, but she shook her head gently. Not everyone stops. Not everyone kneels in the mud for a stranger. Over the next few weeks, Mara visited again, this time bringing homemade empanadas as a thank you. She met Noah, who was shy at first but quickly warmed up to her warm smile and quiet strength. Ethan noticed something he hadn't felt in years: laughter that didn't feel forced, conversations that didn't revolve around grief or bills. For the first time since losing his wife, his home didn't feel so empty. But the real change came unexpectedly. Mara learned about Ethan's struggles, the long hours, the overdue mortgage payments, the way he juggled everything alone. She had connections in the community through her department, and she quietly nominated him for a local Citizen Courage Award, which came with a financial grant and public recognition. She also connected him with a better-paying logistics position through a community program supporting single parents. When Ethan received the call offering him the new job, he was speechless. It meant stable hours, better benefits, and time to attend Noah's school events without begging for shifts to change. It meant breathing room. It meant hope. Mara told him she hadn't done it out of obligation. She did it because his kindness reminded her why she wore the badge in the first place. In saving her life, he had unknowingly restored her faith during a moment when she had nearly lost everything. And in return, she wanted to make sure his courage wasn't forgotten. Months later, on another bright afternoon, Ethan stood in a small park watching Noah play while Mara sat beside him, her uniform crisp and her recovery complete. The trees were green again, sunlight warm against their faces. Life had not erased their scars, but it had given them something new to hold on to. Ethan realized that the day he stopped on that highway, he thought he was only saving a stranger. He didn't know he was also rescuing himself from years of quiet sorrow. Kindness had come full circle, turning tragedy into connection, fear into friendship, and loneliness into something that felt like family. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Let us know where you're watching from and whether you believe one act of courage can truly change a life. And before this story ends, here's a special request.